For the past 3 decades, an alleged killer was on the loose for a brutal robbery and a brutal murder. All these years later, the massive manhunt has come to an end. We have an update in a True Crime Chronicles and a warning to some of our viewers. You may find some of the footage disturbing. Let's take a look.
It was a snowy Sunday night in Montgomery County, Maryland. 57-year-old James Essel had just purchased this old country store. A customer walks in and pays for a bottle of wine. What happens next? James's family will never forget.
Who would do something like that?
Police say a customer struck his wine bottle over James's head, stole money from the register, and proceeded to stab him 29 times. The man got away, and police never found him.
I felt like no one cared and they just forgot about him.
A few years ago, cold case detectives gave the case a second look. They ran a sample of blood found on the cash register using modern DNA and genealogy testing. They developed this composite of the suspect and were able to track down a relative. Soon, they found a DNA match to the crime scene.
How can someone live like that all these years knowing, what he did?
The suspect was identified as Hans Alejandro Huitz. He was living in Virginia Beach. Officers confront him in his car, and Huitz pulls out a gun. U.S. Marshals and cold case detectives plead over and over for Huitz to surrender.
Drop the gun!
And then police open fire. Officers kill him. Some closure for James's family, but it still remains a mystery as to why Huitz targeted him at that store nearly 30 years ago.
But of course, we want answers. We want to know why, and we may not ever know why.
Wow. Earlier, Al, Lindsay, and I spoke with an investigative reporter who has been following this case. Take a look. We're joined by reporter Bruce Leshan from WUSA in Washington, D.C. Bruce, thank you so much for joining us. A violent ending to a nearly 30-year manhunt. Police finally found a suspect and shot and killed him. So tell me, where does the case stand now, and what is the protocol for that officer involved?
Well, it's the key thing that happens always in police shootings. People are put on administrative leave if they were involved in a shooting.
Right.
And then there's a big investigation, and they try and determine if the shooting was justified. And at some point, there are all these processes. And then at some point, the officer will go back on the street. So you kind of heard how many times they tried to get him to put the gun down on the tape. That's what's remarkable in this case.
Right.
At one point, they say, he waved the gun at them, and they felt like they needed to take action. So that's what's being looked into right now.
Interesting.
All right, Bruce, can you just tell us how the cops were able to get this guy? And did he know that they were outside surrounding his home?
No, and he ended up in his car, and how they got him is just amazing. I mean, they have this amazing cold case squad in Montgomery County, and Montgomery County has been going back. This is just outside of Washington, D.C., a suburb of Washington, D.C., and they've been going back and looking at a bunch of old cold cases. They found the guy who abducted two girls from a shopping mall 30 years ago as well, and they tracked him down. And now they've tracked this guy down. They're doing all kinds of work. And what it really is about is kind of a combination of old-style genealogy, looking at people's family trees, and kind of the latest cutting-edge DNA technology. So they were able to come up with a DNA profile from the blood spatters at the scene at that store. And that led them to a guy that they went and they took a swab from him. It turned out it wasn't the right guy. They took that sample back, looked at it, determined that it was a very close relative, either a father or a brother of the killer from the scene. The father was dead, and the guy only had one brother, so that's how they got their man.
Now, Bruce, this all unfolded over the past months. How is James' daughter coping with the news, and what did she tell you?
I have talked to her repeatedly, and her whole life has been affected, and her sister passed away before the cops figured out who had killed their father. She was terribly sad about that.
Wow.
Perpetua is glad that there's some closure here, that there's some answers, but she's mad that she'll never know why. I mean, here her dad was killed for what seems like no reason, and because the accused killer died in this shootout, she will never know for certain why he would have done it. There was no reason to do it. I mean, you so often hear in these kinds of cases, James Essel was a guy that would give you the shirt off his back. He was a guy who came from Ghana, worked his way up. He'd been a banker, he'd been a restaurant owner, decided to settle in this small town and open this store out in rural Montgomery County because it reminded him of the hills of Ghana where he came from. And then somebody comes into his store, stabs him 29 times, part of it with the wine bottle that he had actually just purchased in the store.
God, such a tragic ending. I'm glad she got closure, but I know there's more questions left open, like the motive, for instance. We want to thank you, Bruce, so much. To read more on this case, visit WUSA.com.